So today we're going to be talking about probably the greatest general, which nobody knows about. And we're not just talking about him for the sake of talking about him, but we're actually talking about him in relation to how to run your personal development or your personal self-actualization journey. And also, of course, what we're going to be getting into is why is that relevant to you watching this now? If you're into meditation, if you're into shadow work, if you're into anything to do with rebuilding and reprogramming your internal world, taking the bad, flushing it out, and then actually implementing and downloading some new belief systems, right? So if you don't know what this channel is and who I am, my name's Aaron. I run this channel, Unconscious Flow, which is all about taking all of the tools I learned from unconscious work and shadow work, and then fusing it with all of the stuff I learned consciously through conscious coaching, more traditional coaching, putting them together so we have this kind of flow where you can live life effortlessly and in the way that you want to. What I'm about to get into now is cool as a hook, but it's also super cool because it's really, really practical and tangible for how to actually look at running your life, right? So first of all, we need to look at who this character is, Pyrrhus of Epirus. He's a little bit of a, I guess you could call a kind of history nerd hero of mine, okay? Epirus in this time period, just after Alexander's conquests. And it's in this time period called the Wars of the Diadochi. The Diadochi are all of Alexander's successor states. They're all of his generals. And they basically start fighting as soon as he dies, right? That's the important part. And Pyrrhus comes to power in Epirus, which is a kind of backwater kingdom, kind of similar to what Macedon was before Philip of Macedon and Alexander really kind of, I don't want to say industrialized, but really improved it and made it the dominant power in mainland Greece. So Epirus is in a similar kingdom as that. But when Pyrrhus was 3 years old, he gets, the kingdom kind of gets sacked. And at 3 years old, he has to escape to where these barbarian Illyrians at the time are living. And that's kind of his introduction into kinghood, right? And then he comes back a few times until he's really firmly on the throne in Epirus when he's in his late teenage years or early 20s. He's kind of this legendary character in antiquity. Not so much today, as the title suggests, but he was in antiquity because the Homeric epics, we don't really have anything like them today in mainstream culture, where they were like the thing. So the Homeric hero, he leads from the front, he's well liked by his soldiers, he goes on all these conquests, he's the god's favorite, all this kind of stuff. And if you look at Pyrrhus's life, he kind of lives his life in accordance to these epics. He's insanely brave. He actually fights a few single combats and wins all of them against other armies' commanders, so the battle doesn't have to be fought by his men. He also frees a lot of battle captives, doesn't treat them badly like he does with the Macedonians when he defeats them in battle, actually. And he kind of gets this nickname called the Eagle really early on in his life. So he's just a complete, exactly what you would think in terms of like a Homeric hero, in terms of how the ancient Greeks viewed him. He's also one of the first people who was able to ever consistently defeat Rome as Rome was rising. So enough of me giving you context about him, because the important part about Pyrrhus is that you don't remember him. That's the important part, because that means that he was ultimately unsuccessful. And he was ultimately unsuccessful. He wins successive battles against Rome. His victory gets coined a Pyrrhic victory, which is when the odds of winning are so high that it might as well be a loss, right? Now, I actually think this is taken a little bit out of context, because the reason why that's the case is also the reason about why it relates so heavily to anyone on their self-actualization journey. Because Rome at this time is a budding republic. But it's consolidated its power for many, many years. It's come back from being sacked and all this kind of stuff. It has a really, really strong administration system. It has a really, really strong centralization in a sense. And this allows it to rebuild its losses after losing all the time, basically, to Pyrrhus. These two big battles at Heraclea and I forget what the other one's name is. And it's able to draw on all this manpower. Pyrrhus, on the other hand, the thing that you have to realize about his conquest is he's in Epirus, and then he goes over to Italy because he gets invited by people to go over there to help defend Rome. He defeats Rome twice, goes to the gates of Rome, but can't really siege it because the walls are too big. Then he gets invited to Sicily to defeat and defend the Greeks from the Carthaginians, and he completely wrecks the Carthaginians there, besides one city, which he can't take. But, he leads from the front. There's one instance where, he's the first up the ladder in the siege, all this kind of stuff. So he's just winning all the time. But because he left his allies in Italy and went to Sicily, he pissed off his allies because he just went and left them to fend for themselves with Rome. This is a very kind of defining trait of Pyrrhus. He's quite kind of ADHD or ADD in terms of how he motivates himself, right? He just wants to fight loads of people. He doesn't really have a big grand strategy aim. which is the exact thing which I see in most of my clients. It's not that, oh, I want to get better at, I want to be more confident in myself, right? I have a lot of male clients that they want to be more confident in their masculinity, or they want to be more confident in relationships and dating, or maybe they want to be more confident in their work. They want to be able to actually be confident in themselves to such an extent that they can afford to take breaks. A lot of people that I work with are afraid of taking breaks because they're afraid of being lazy or procrastination and all this stuff when they're actually already quite high achievers. All of this stuff, you can work with all of this stuff, and I do work with all of this stuff all together at the same time. But the thing that you can learn from Pyrrhus and why he eventually gets defeated at Rome is because he tries to do a flanking maneuver. His Samnite guides, who was one of the tribes who actually suffered really heavy losses when Pyrrhus went to do whatever he wanted in Sicily, kind of mislead him on the flanking maneuver. So the Romans see him coming, they're able to defeat him, all that kind of stuff. Because he wasn't able to actually visualize and build a grand strategy for themselves. Now, this is a big part of my work that I do with one-on-one clients, is I make sure that part is taken care of for them. However, that isn't done by myself. I have to obviously ask them questions, make sure they really know what's going on, what they really know, what they want to be doing, right? So how does this apply to you? Well, the reason why this applies to you is what I see in so many people is they just kind of cherry pick and they nitpick from so many different coaches, so many different people, or so many different methods, and they feel like they're doing all this stuff, but really what they're always doing is busy work, right? Pyrrhus was an amazing general and an amazing tactician. He was a really bad leader because in Sicily, he was able to defeat the Romans consecutively, even to the point where they were really, really considering a peace deal, a peace treaty for him, which would have consolidated his gains in Italy and his allies in Italy. But then he goes off to fight the Carthaginians in Sicily, right? And he defeats them all there, defeats them so badly that a lot of their cities actually turn to his side, but he isn't able to just finish off the last siege, okay? And then he goes, and as he's still putting pressure on them there, he then has to go back to Italy to fight the Romans again, right? And then the Carthaginians take back all of their possessions in Sicily again. He gets beaten by the Romans. He has to go back to his kingdom of Epirus in Greece, and all of his gains are lost in Italy. And then he gets invited to be the king of Macedonia because they need a new leader, and he says no. And he goes and campaigns against Sparta and Argos instead, where he eventually dies in a very kind of random way, where apparently the legend goes he's fighting an Argonian soldier in one-on-one combat again, you know, like just like the epic legends of Achilles, who he actually said that he descended from, right? So he was fighting one-on-one, and one of the women on top of the roofs happened to be that soldier's mother, and throws a tile down at Pyrrhus, and it hits him, paralyzes him, and then the soldier he's fighting beheads him, and he dies that way. Despite having won so many more battles and won so many more engagements against really, really big opponents, much bigger than him, the Macedonians, the Carthaginians, the Romans, the Spartans, right? All of the Spartans were probably weaker than him at that point. He goes and he dies that way, right? So the whole reason I'm making this video and I painted this really, really vivid picture is to give you context about what happens if you don't prioritize and you don't have a bigger picture, grand strategy of not only how to organize and digest information, but then to also apply that, right? So you don't have to listen to me. You can pick whoever you want. But one of the most important things about my journey is picking the right mentor and then staying with that mentor for years, right? So this isn't something you do lightly, okay? It's not something, you don't just pick one mentor and then you just stay with them out of loyalty. No. Because when you're picking a mentor, one of the main things that you have to do is look for, are they also continuously growing, and not just continuously growing, but exponentially growing as well, right? That's one of the big things too, right? And it doesn't just have to be with mentors. What it has to be with is, what is the grand strategy that I'm approaching my life with? What are the values that I have? The principles that I hold, right? You don't have to answer all of these questions straight away because, you know, a lot of you won't know this, and that's fine. That's totally fine, right? And I'm sure that my principles and my values will be much, much different 50 years in the future. The only thing you can really do is find that out as best you can, one step at a time, right? But it's not just taking one step at a time and then going in all these different directions and then being confused 10 years later why you're not where you want to be. You want to still have that path, right? So to make that much more tangible, the issue that I'm seeing that relates so much to Pyrrhus is people constantly digesting new information from new sources and then not taking actually any action on that. And if they do take action on that, it's kind of going out like this, right? Like that. Whereas instead, it should be more single-pointed focus. And this has nothing to do with the amount of topics that you pick. Has nothing to do with that. It's all to do with what is my actual aim here? What is my actual goal? What do I actually want, right? So in relation to this work, which is why you're watching this, it's to do with people kind of trying to do all this internal stuff, trying to do this meditation, trying to do this shadow work, release all these beliefs, trying to get some new beliefs in, and they just kind of are picking from this guy and this guy and this guy and this girl and whatever she's saying, right? And they're not actually committing to one method for a longer period of time, because that's where you're going to get your results from, right? So when I was doing jiu-jitsu, I picked a few different mentors. So you had the Mendes brothers, Lucas Lepre was a big one. Those are my two kind of main mentors in that. Oh, and then Mikey Musumeci, right? Because I did a lot of trial and error. I listened to a lot of different people at the same time to see who I vibed with, them as a person, but also their teaching style, and then also their style when they were on the mats, when they were fighting. And then for the next few years, I just studied from then. And then when I really needed to supplement something, like there was a really specialist, maybe there was some body lock passing I wanted to learn, or there was maybe I really needed to get better at a certain leg lock position or certain leg locks, or maybe pinning positions, right? I would go and supplement with people like Danaher or Craig Jones and all that kind of stuff. But I had a completely different body type to those people. I had a completely different style. I didn't necessarily vibe so much with how they were teaching. Not that they were teaching bad or anything like that. It just, the information didn't go in as much. So they just weren't my priority, right? And that's the real crux of what I'm talking about right now. There needs to be a hierarchy of people who you get information from, and then the information that they give you, implementing that hierarchy in terms of what your goals are and what your values are, right? So just take the jiu-jitsu example. My goal was to, especially at the end of it, was to become a much more all-rounded athlete, not just to be a specialist in no-gi, which is when you're not wearing basically they look like white pajamas, right? So if you think of a person who does judo, it's kind of that same thing as what a gi is. I wanted to become well-rounded. I wanted to be able to train in the gi and no-gi, because I started training no-gi, which is basically just, you can call it like submission wrestling, right? That's what a lot of people call it. So I wanted to have that as a goal. I wanted to do good in both in the points competitions and also the non-points competitions. So I wanted to be an all-round athlete. So the way in which I processed information, the way in which I chose the information to even process to begin with, would have been completely different to someone who just wanted to do really well in the ADCC style, right? So another one of my friends from back in England, Nathan, who was one of my big mentors in jiu-jitsu as well, right? I don't want to speak for him, but he was much more inclined to be better at the ADCC rule set and no-gi, right? So his way of training and the people who he got information from were different to me. There was still overlap, but they were different. So when you're on this journey of self-actualization or personal development, it's really, really key that you have this framework in your mind. The framework of what is it that I'm trying to actually accomplish here? And then what is in the order of prioritization that these things are, right? And then there's the third section of this, which is a little bit more advanced. So if you don't get this, no worries. But it's about how do I link all of this together into one single principle, one single aim? And this is what I am relentlessly focused on all the time with people, with coaches, with clients that I'm coaching, right? Because it's super important to know where they want to go and how they want to get there, and in the order of priority that they want to get there, right? Because when you understand this, change becomes much more easy, becomes much more streamlined, becomes much more effortless. And it gives a sense of direction. Because even though it is continuous one-on-one work, if there's no direction, it's easy to just go in a circle, which is why actually a lot of people come to me after going to coaches that doesn't really work out for them, because the coaches probably weren't able to integrate this perspective. Or if they were able to integrate this perspective, they just weren't able to do it for that client, or they just didn't do it. So if you are interested in doing more one-on-one work, I do have a one-on-one link in the comments below. If you're not quite ready for that, then you can just watch whatever interests you on this channel. What I would say is if there is a certain topic or there's a certain question that you have about this video that you just watched, is to write this in the comments. Or maybe any questions in general around self-actualization or this journey that you're on. Because what I am doing is I am actually doing a personalized one-on-one videos for those people, which I post to this channel. So you actually get a bit of free, kind of a taste of what one-on-one coaching would be like, or what one-on-one coaching, if it would vibe for you. But again, if you don't want to do that, you don't have to. You can just stay around and watch the free content. So hopefully this was helpful, and I will see you on the next one.